Hello. This is Jonathan Kelmis, your host of Low Gravity, a micromobility podcast brought to you by Cosmic. I'm sitting here with the great Jonathan Galeano. He is the business development manager for Latam for Here Mobility. I had the pleasure of meeting you last year in Israel, actually, right?
Yes,
so
indeed.
It's kind of a funny story. How did you end up in Israel, and how did that help you actually do business with micromobility here in Latin America?
Whoa, fantastic. So first of all, thank you for the invitation of the podcast.
I
Fantastic.
forced you into it. I don't.
Especially because we get to do it in Colombia, which is a
Sí.
place that we both love.
Yeah.
So it's fantastic that we're now sitting in Bogota.
True.
So just to summarize the story that maybe I told you over a couple of hours, but basically I left Colombia over 12 years ago. I did my first degree in the States, and then I did my master's in Tel Aviv University, and that's basically one of the main reasons, together with my wife now, back then we were dating, that led me to emigrate to Israel.
Nice.
I did my master's over there, and when I was finishing the last 2 months of my degree, I got a job offer from a consultancy company that basically does or helps startups enter Latin America, build them anything from translations to meetings to be like government relations. And so I jumped into this consultancy company. And very quickly we realized that there's a big or a massive potential of, tech interchange between Israel and Latin America, especially Colombia, or let's say especially for myself as a Colombian looking into Colombia. And very fastly I ended up by doing some projects with, defense, and then with science, and then with some agro. And the last job that I had before joining Here Mobility was with telemedicine or remote monitoring of patients for an Israeli company also here.
Trying to do business in Latin America.
We
Very
actually did quite well business. We executed several projects of national networks of telemedicine. And then I received a call for Here Mobility. It was almost 2 years ago, telling me basically this is the concept. We're a new marketplace, a new business unit of Here Technologies, and they like my profile to also lead or help the strategy in Latin America. And I joined almost 2 years ago Here Mobility as the business development manager. Initially for Latin America. Now all of the projects that we've been doing took me to focus specifically into Colombia.
Into Colombia specifically.
Yeah.
It's a really interesting position, I would say, you're in. Israel being, the world leader in tech in general, where every country around the world is trying to acquire what Israel actually creates. And then on the other side, Latin America, which is such a heavy emerging market. And the typical strategy out of Latin America was always, let's go copy what the gringos are doing.
Sure.
And now it's actually starting to change. A lot of innovation is starting, and the fresh ideas are actually emerging out of Latin America.
Absolutely.
Because of the change of culture. I mean, Postmates exists in the US. There's a bunch of these last mile delivery companies, but what Rappi is doing in Latin America is unique simply because of the workforce. I mean, in the States, we can't pull off what Rappi can pull off here. You'll buy a smoothie from a McDonald's or something in the app in United States, you'll spend more on the cost of delivery than the actual product that you purchase.
Very possible.
And it's a very typical thing. So being a kind of hybrid Latin, Israeli, Western, you have all of this mix. What is your observations? You've seen the entire world of micromobility so far. What are your observations on the industry? Which countries and cities are doing it right? Where do you think has space for improvement?
So I think that for any guy involved in the industry, 2019 was kind of like a very, very, very shaky and unexpected and, and kind of very fast-paced year.
Yeah.
Let's say that, I can share kind of my knowledge of what's happening in Latin America, just not also to expand into other regions, but so far we've seen, Lime announced over a month ago that they are ceasing operations. today, we woke up and we saw that, Rappi's green button is no longer there. And there's a lot of, rumors, nothing that I can confirm because I have any insights information, but, I've heard from the industry, that Green is also struggling with their operations. When a year ago was, just recently, freshly, Lime, put full force into Latin America. Green raised a heck load of money to expand in Latin America, the merge of Green and Yellow and creation of Grow. And now we see back of what we saw probably when we met, which is the local players which have, despite any predictions, I believe,
stuck around
managed
somehow.
to find their niche markets and, I don't want to say make it profitable, but at least, sustain their operations in the niche market. We see it with Movo here in Colombia as well, and we see it definitely with, with Cosmic in all of the countries that you operate. So I think that, last year was the peak and the end of the craziness and the hype of micromobility. I don't believe to myself that we will see, especially for LATAM, speaking, any further massive rounds of investments into micromobility
into the one big fat player.
I do not believe so. I think that the industry, let's say in 2020, when a year ago we were pressed, we just were watching this craziness of the micromobility, and in less than a year we saw Green and Lime here, and specifically in Colombia, and all of the other operators pour thousands of scooters, and now you see them slowly retreating back.
Retreating back.
And the key word, not only for micromobility, but I think for the whole mobility area, is it's revenue. I think that all of the VCs around the world, this is also something that we've seen in other industries. SoftBank down, they're looking now, the big ages of, just endless pockets are over in most of the industries. So I think that finding a quick way to make it your operations or any micromobility operator profitable is key to sustain or to remain in the market. And if you manage to actually find that niche and find that thing that can make your operations profitable, I think that you might get more attention of the investors, which are more cautious than a year, 2 or 3 ago, but are still very curious of what the micromobility can offer the cities.
Yeah, I think so too. We talk about this a lot, but this seems to be, 2020 seems to be like the year of the micro operator, the localized operator who has a stronger understanding of what their market is. I think one of the biggest difficulties in that model is specifically seasonality. One of the big benefits that the macro operators were talking about is that when it's raining in Bogota, we're okay because we're also in Medellin, for example. Right. And so really understanding all the different variables that go into affecting unit economics or profitability, as you're putting it, become really, really important. And it becomes really hard to learn all of that from scratch. Most micro operators are not entering with macro ambitions. They're entering because it's a really exciting industry and it's fun and it's something that you can actually get inspired about. It's not every business you can get inspired about. However, that lack of knowledge is part of the reason why Cosmic exists in the first place, is we're trying to bridge the gap between the ambition and the reality of the situation, which is exactly what you're talking about. I don't think it's bad news that these monster players are regressing at all for the industry. I think that it's just the typical Silicon Valley, even though Green is from Mexico, it's the typical Silicon Valley story, where you grow really, really fast and you position yourself to basically, how would I put this? You exist at scale because you exist at scale, not because your business needs the scale.
Sure.
So you're investing so much in growth and so much in just blanketing the cities in scooters, and maybe you try some performance marketing, et cetera, that by the time you've actually learned the lesson, you've already burned through tens of millions of dollars.
Right.
And I don't think that's necessarily reflective on micro mobility as much as it's reflective on, the typical Silicon Valley story that we all live.
Correct, and I believe that for that, following your ideas, which I agree, and for 2020, I think that the same way that you've proven, with the Cosmic model, that what we spoke before, finding a niche market and making it profitable is the way to go, even if you don't necessarily have to, grow at a massive scale. That also our conclusions for from Here Mobility. We saw very, 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 let's say, intense, in the good sense of the conversation, discussions or collaboration agreements with many micromobility players in Latin America and around the world, where their position, a year ago was pretty dominant and not very into the aggregator model, and then having most of them, if not all of them, reaching back to us and saying, from not only from that, but also from fintech or whatever, going back and saying, okay, listen, we might have, and we see it also in the ride-hailing, and we see it also in the taxi industry, as from a multimodal perspective, that basically all of the operators of different modes of transportations are coming back and saying we're better off just focusing on our core business, which is just call it the hardware, or call it the taxi, or call it the service in
the accessibility to the inventory. Basically, that's their business.
And let's leave the technological intermediation between a user and a provider to other tools, to our ecosystem, to a joint efforts, to partnerships. So I think that's that's definitely the way that LATAM is going to start going, which is an ecosystem, an open ecosystem of mobility as a service.
Which would be great.
Yes.
Which would be great, definitely. Because I think the problem with the dominant players, I'm not going to point fingers at anyone, but a lot of times from the Western world, people overlook who the dominant player is. And it's not always the Ubers of the world. A lot of times it's traditional businesses that are the dominant players. So giving the access to a user who can actually get the response to the inventory in real time and to get access to wherever they need to go, whether it's through Transmilenio, which is the busing system here in Bogota, however they need to do it. Let's take the last few minutes and just kind of explain what Here does, and we'll do a little bit of shameless self-promotion.
Sure. So basically, we're Here Mobility. We're creating for the past 2.5 years the first and most robust marketplace that connect supply and demand, when we understand, the suppliers being those transportation companies in any of the method, from micromobility all the way to public transportation. We integrate with each one of them through different, technologies that we have developed, different APIs, each one of the methods. Micromobility, we use some technology. For public transportation, we have another infrastructure. For taxi systems, we integrate into their dispatch systems. And on the other hand, we also bring, on a B2B and a B2B2C, also partnerships to bring businesses or the end users of those businesses mobility offerings. So for that purpose, we're working now with Bancolombia, or Nequi, the fintech of Bancolombia, in putting also a mobility button within their app to offer all of the users of the bank or of Nequi mobility services.
So a Colombian resident, or Panama as well, because Nequi is also in Panama, a resident of these countries will be able to go into their fintech app, which is the Nequi app. Directly in there, there's a button for Here Mobility, which is access to this massive aggregated inventory.
Correct.
And essentially with one or two clicks, because they've already done all the registration, not only be able to pay for the service, but also actually request the service.
Correct.
It's fantastic. It is definitely the holy grail of mobility. But Here is one of the companies that's actually pulling it off. It's every other day being in this space, someone comes to me and goes, wouldn't it be a great idea if one app could call any ride sharing, or one app could use any scooter? And it's fantastic, but it comes with the blocker is not a technical blocker. The blocker is an industry blocker.
Absolutely.
Well, you guys are doing really amazing stuff. It's great to see you here in Colombia. I've now seen you in 2 different countries.
Yes.
I really appreciate your time. Yeah, I really, really appreciate your time. For more information on Here Mobility, go to mobility.here.com. And to check out Cosmic, go to cosmicgo.co.